This is the Post Nihilist, and I'm doing a follow-up video or an update video on my 2014 video, in which I talked about ways to reduce menstrual cramps, take no more um, painkillers, medication for period menstrual cramps. And so in this update video, a follow-up video, I want to discuss the adjustments that I've made since then, since late 2014 when I did that video. First of all, when I did that video back in 2014, I hadn't started mowing. At this point, I mow my lawn and I mow it manually. So at that point, I wasn't mowing any lawn or anything like that, but now I am. And so, and in the spring, I actually have to do it once a week. And over the summer, I do it maybe once every week and a half or so. So that's what, 6 months of mowing the grass, like once a week or once every week and a half with a manual mower. So it's pretty labor intensive. So, and on top of that, at this point, I'm doing a lot of work in my garden, which I wasn't doing then. I have to shovel, compost, dig in my garden, stuff like that, things that tax your back. And so I'm just doing more labor intensive things at this point in time. And what I realized with the cutting out meats and nuts for 4 to 5 days during the time period in which I would have menstrual cramps, while that greatly reduced the cramping, I also realized that I wasn't healing at the rate or at all. Well, at the rate, I'll say at the rate that I had been before. And I ascertained that that was because I had cut out meat and nuts during the time period that I was doing the labor intensive activity. And so it took my body longer to heal. And I probably wasn't as protected. My body was more fragile during those days when I wasn't consuming the proteins that I needed in order to maintain, a strong skeletal muscular system. So what I realized is that I can't go without meat and nuts for like a 4 or 5 day period. On top of that, I realized that I also need milk. I had some injuries, because I type, and so I noticed that I was getting like soreness in my left hand. And when I started back drinking milk, because I thought that I was lactose intolerant, and so I cut out milk for a while. But when I started drinking milk again, I realized that it's all in portion control. And therefore, if I drank 3 or 4 gulps of milk a day, just 3 or 4 gulps, rather than like a whole glass, then I don't have lactose intolerance and I don't experience like weight gain or gastrointestinal like problems. So I incorporated milk, and the hand cramping and soreness goes away once I did that, and I continue to do that. I don't experience the soreness in my hand that I had before. So at this point in time, with the amount of labor that I do in my garden, my manual mower, I realized I have to consume milk every day, just 3 or 4 gulps. I consume meat every other day, and that meat is a very smaller than my palm even, piece of beef, lean beef, and a small piece of fish every other day. And then on the off days, I consume, just nuts as my protein, and then of course the 3 or 4 gulps of milk. But I don't go any days without a complete protein anymore. And the complete protein, like I said, on my off days is the whole milk, the 3 or 4 gulps of whole milk. So yesterday, I noticed, I had some cramping. And I think that the severe cramping that I had back in 2004 and before was because I wasn't doing portion control. If I was hungry, I would get the chuck roll of beef, and I just break off beef or make three. Sometimes I could eat like three patties in a setting, you know, and I just really didn't pay attention to the portion. And the same with nuts. I didn't really pay attention to the portion. But I think it was more so the meat that caused the intense cramping, because I would make like a meal of only meats. And when you make a meal of meats and either you have too much meat or you don't have enough like vegetables in order to help process that meat and get it out of your system, then it does tax the digestive system. But at this point in time, I make sure I only get like maybe the size of a deck of cards or less portion of meat, one small patty of meat every other day with a small piece of fish in a stir fry with vegetables. Okay, so I'm no longer making a meal of only meats. I combine it with, chopped up celery, greens, onions, garlic, things like that. Brussels sprouts, things that'll help that meat get out of my system. Because the reason why I consume meat every other day is because I give the meat like a day to process and get out of my system. Now, if I notice I have some constipation, then I'll skip, I won't consume meat after that day that I've had off. I'll consume nuts and then the 3 gulps of milk to have my complete protein for the day. But if I notice any constipation, then I will break that pattern of consuming meat every other day, and I'll skip another day in order to give the meat, 2 days rather than one day to fully process and leave my system. So you have to pay attention to your body, but that extra day, that day in between, is so I don't consume too much meat. And like I said, a small patty of meat and a small piece of like tilapia. You know how they sell like at Walmart or whatever, those, or at Aldi or any grocery store, those little, pieces of fish. One of those, and then a small, maybe the size of a deck of cards or less, uh, patty of 93% lean beef. That's what I eat every other day with, for like my lunch, with, the cut up vegetables in like a stir fry with water, to soften and cook the vegetables and the meat. But I've noticed that my cramps aren't noticeable, like, because of course, because I'm no longer going without meat and nuts during the 4 day period that I experienced cramps during my period. Yes, my cramps are more noticeable, but they're not to the point that they are unbearable. I like last night, I had some cramping, and it was annoying, and it lasted several hours, but it wasn't unbearable. Like it was maybe, I want to say a 4 on the scale of pain, 3 or 4. So it was annoying. I knew it was there, but it wasn't unbearable, to the point where I had to stop what I was doing and go lay down or something. And that's only because, I have, like I said, incorporated I don't go days anymore without consuming a, a complete protein. And then, because I don't want my bones and muscles to weaken during that time period, and for me to get an injury that will be slow to heal, because I didn't have those complete proteins to help heal it. And on top of that, diabetes runs in my family, and I can't, like, I have a problem, I think, with gluten. So I don't consume breads. They raise my blood sugar. So no breads, no pastas, no fried foods. So, in order to keep my blood sugar maintained, I go like 2 out of the 3 meals that I eat a day, I consume with either nuts or meat. in order to keep my blood sugar level. Because if I just consume, say I consume, like if I consume too much Brussels sprouts, my blood sugar will go up. If I consume onions, things like that that are sweet when they're cooked, like cabbage like foods, or too many onions, too many cooked carrots, things like that, can cause my blood sugar to shoot up. And what counteracts it would be the fat in like whole milk or in nuts or in meat. So actually, for breakfast and lunch, um, for breakfast I'll have like a cup of nuts, and usually that consists of half a cup of peanuts and half a cup of almonds. So, but it's a heaping cup. So it's how much will fit in a cup, and it'll make like a little mountain on top, but no more than what'll fit in a cup. A cup of nuts with chopped up vegetables to help it um, help my body process it and leave my body. So you eat if you eat like fruit. The trick to it to keep your cramping down is to do portion control, so you know how much you're getting. So, a cup of nuts, a heaping cup of nuts, with like a lot of vegetables, a lot of like chopped up celery for breakfast, cooked in a pot. That usually leaves my system before I consume lunch. And so for lunch, I also consume like a cup of nuts and chopped up celery and vegetables, like um, or on every other day, for lunch I'll have the instead of the cup of nuts, I'll have the beef patty and the piece of fish with nuts, with not nuts, with vegetables as my lunch on every other day. And then for dinner, I just have vegetables, whether it be like cooked fresh greens with onions or cooked fresh greens with garlic. The onions and the garlic give it like a greasy texture so that I don't need to put like oil or anything in it. And maybe and also I'll put maybe 5 or 6 Brussels sprouts in like my lunch and my dinner, just to help with, because I found that Brussels sprouts also help clean your system, help keep you regular. And so and I consume salt only with one meal, usually with breakfast, but only with one meal a day, and the rest of the meals, with the variety of vegetables and all that I put in there, they're seasoned already through the vegetables and the meats. So, but just one meal a day do I put salt on. But as long as, like I said, as long as I use portion control, no more than a heaping cup of nuts in breakfast and lunch on every other day, and then every other day, no more than a cup of nuts for breakfast and a small patty and a small piece of fish with vegetables for lunch, and then vegetables for dinner. And I've not had any cramping during this period of doing that that's been unbearable. Like I said, the level of cramping does slightly go up since I did reintroduce nuts and meat. Um, so now the only meal that I go without is my last meal, dinner, because I want to make sure everything processes and leaves my system. So usually, when I wake up, I'll have a bowel movement, and I'll know that I'm not constipated or anything, because my last meal of the day was maybe like collard greens, spinach. Oh, and spinach is great. Cooked spinach is so great. If you experience water retention, cooked spinach is great for that. Bananas also are good for it, but I don't eat bananas because, like I said, I have an issue with blood sugar, and so I tend to only eat one apple per. I eat one apple per day, but as long as you watch your portions, and like my last meal is like collard greens and maybe half an onion cooked, something like that, with 5 or 6 Brussels sprouts to clean out my system for the next day. But as long as you watch your portions, and maybe a cup of protein with a whole bunch of vegetables for a meal, or a small piece of meat and a small piece of fish for a meal with along with a lot of cooked vegetables. As long as you watch your portions, your cramps shouldn't be that bad. At this point, I'm not suggest. I mean, unless your cramps are terrible and you're not going to be doing. I'll just say like this: if you're going to cut out protein because your cramps are like terrible, I wouldn't do any intense exercising or moving and lifting during those days that you are not consuming a complex protein. Like I said, at this point with the rake, and I even do manual raking as well. So at this point where I'm doing the manual raking, I'm doing the manual lawn mowing once a week or once every week and a half. I'm doing the compost transportation. I'm transporting it with a shovel. I'm to my garden. Or to other compost bins. I'm doing like a lot of like manual labor in my garden. So if your cramps are so severe that you have to cut out um, protein because even the smaller amount, but I would try portion control first. I would try just cutting back rather than cutting out completely. But if you have to cut out, then do not do anything strenuous during that time period because you're at a more vulnerable, fragile state when you haven't consumed complex proteins for a number of days. So, like I said, try just cutting back, portion control. And, I experienced cramps last night. They're noticeable but not unbearable. But try portion control. Even if you can only consume maybe half a cup of nuts a day during that time period. And nuts are not a complete protein, but at least get your three, you know, if you have to go without nuts and meat on those days, at least get your 3 or 4 gulps of milk. Get your complete protein on those days. So if the cutting back, if you're still not able to deal with the pain from, consuming maybe a half a cup of nuts, maybe a small piece of meat a day, cutting back on those days, you still experience extreme cramps, then I would at least consume some milk, some whole milk during those days, and see if that helps. But yeah, again, I found with portion control, the cramps um, decrease significantly. I still don't need to take medication. Like I said, sometimes I do notice the cramping. It's annoying, but not unbearable because I reintroduce the meat and nuts, making sure I consume meat or nuts every day, milk every day. So, like I said, 3, 4 level pain, but it's not unbearable. But make sure you get your complex protein, your complete protein every day, in the form of at least, some whole milk so that your body is able to stay strong and heal properly.